You order something for $3. Free shipping. No tax charged at checkout. No customs form. No fees hidden anywhere in the total. You don't even think about it, because why would you? It just shows up on your porch about 2 weeks later, and you move on with your day. Now do that again. And again. Millions of people doing that same $3 checkout every single day for years. That price was never really about cheap manufacturing. It only worked because of one sentence buried in a 1938 trade law, a rule so small and so forgotten that almost nobody in Washington was paying attention to it for the better part of a century. A rule that quietly let over 1 billion packages cross into America in a single year, most of them never opened, never inspected, never taxed. 2 companies figured out exactly how far that rule could stretch. Temu built an empire on it. Shine built an empire on it. And for years, nobody stopped them. Then in 2025, the US government finally found it and killed it. This is the story of how a rule written for snow globes turned into the backbone of the cheapest shopping apps in America, and why that $3 order is never coming back. In 1938, Congress added a small provision to a much bigger trade law. Nobody threw a press conference over it. It was buried inside the Tariff Act, a few lines long, and it did one simple thing. If something you brought into the country was worth $1 or less, customs wouldn't tax it, wouldn't inspect it, wouldn't even really log it. Below $1, it just wasn't worth the government's time. Picture the actual problem they were solving. A woman comes home from a trip to Paris with a snow globe and a keychain in her suitcase. Under strict customs rules, an officer would have to stop her, assess the value of both items, calculate the tax owed, and process the paperwork. For $1's worth of souvenirs. The wage paid to that officer for those 10 minutes would cost the government more than the tax itself. So Congress drew a line. Below it, wave people through. Above it, check everything. That's the entire origin story. Not a plan to reshape global trade. Just a bureaucrat trying to stop wasting time on snow globes. For decades, the line barely moved, because nobody needed it to. $1 in 1938 crept up to $5 by 1978. 40 years, and the threshold grew by $4. Still mostly irrelevant. Still mostly gift shop souvenirs and small mail-order trinkets, the kind of thing your grandmother might have ordered from a catalog. Then in the early 90s, tied to NAFTA-related reforms, the number jumped hard, all the way to $200. A real jump, but still framed the same way it always had been. Small stuff. Not worth the paperwork. The jump that actually changed everything came in 2015. Congress raised the threshold again, this time to $800. And on paper, the reasoning sounded almost noble. Give everyday shoppers ordering online the same treatment a wealthy traveler already gets walking through customs with a suitcase full of purchases. Fairness, dressed up as policy. Here's what nobody in that room seemed to think through. $800 isn't a snow globe. It's not even close. It's a phone. A pair of sneakers. A full wardrobe, if you're smart about how you split the order across a few packages instead of one. A rule written to save a customs officer a headache over a $5 keychain had just quietly grown large enough to run an entire retail business through. Tax-free, inspection-free, almost invisible to the system built to catch everything else you buy. Nobody redesigned Section 321 for what came next. Nobody had to. The door was already standing wide open. It had been open since 1938. It just took until 2015 for the opening to get big enough to matter. And somewhere in Shenzhen, somebody was already staring at that number, running the math on exactly how far it could stretch. Here's what Temu and Shine figured out that most retailers never bothered to look for. Ship a container full of products straight to a US warehouse, and customs treats it as one large import. One assessment. One duty bill, calculated on the full value of everything inside. But ship the exact same products directly to 1,000 individual customers, each package priced under $800, and none of that applies. Not $1 of duty. In most cases, not even a real inspection. Same factory, same product, same boat crossing the same ocean. The only thing that changed was how the boxes got split once they landed. And that one difference was worth billions. So that's exactly what they built around it. Inventory would ship from factories in China to bonded warehouses sitting just across the border, in Mexico and in Canada. From there, instead of one shipment moving in as a single import, it would fracture into millions of individual packages, each one addressed to a different American doorstep, each one small enough on paper to slide clean under the exemption. The warehouse wasn't a shortcut. It was the whole strategy. It worked at a scale that's hard to picture until you see the numbers side by side. In 2015, around 134 million packages entered the U.S. this way. By 2024, that number hit 1.36 billion. Sit with that for a second. Not a slow climb. A 10 times increase in under a decade, all moving through a rule originally sized for a snow globe. By 2024, packages moving through this exemption made up over 92% of all cargo entering the United States, worth more than $64 billion. And Customs was processing more than 4 million of these packages every single day. Think about what that actually asks of a customs officer. Your job is to check what's inside a shipment before it enters the country. Now imagine 4 million tiny shipments landing on your desk daily, and you're told, realistically, most of them can't be checked at all. There simply isn't time. There isn't staff. There isn't a version of this job that scales to that volume. That's not a loophole anymore at that point. A loophole is something a few people slip through quietly. This was a 4-lane highway, built by accident out of a sentence from 1938, with the toll booths and the checkpoints both removed at once. And once a highway like that exists, wide open and mostly unwatched, it doesn't stay full of just cheap t-shirts and phone cases for long. Here's the part that should actually bother you. That $3 price wasn't just cheap manufacturing plus free shipping. It was cheap manufacturing plus zero duties, plus a system that mostly never looked inside the box. The average value of one of these packages was just $54. Small enough to slide past a system that was built to catch big, obvious shipments, not track a billion tiny ones landing every year. Customs didn't have the staff to open a billion packages, so most of them simply didn't get opened. Sit with that for a second. A package crosses an international border, enters your country, and reaches your front door, and in most cases, nobody ever confirmed what was actually inside it. Now here's where it stops being about phone cases. The White House pointed to a much darker use of that same blind spot. Officials said the exemption had been abused by traffickers moving fentanyl and other synthetic opioids straight into the country, hiding inside the exact same low scrutiny that let your sneakers slide through untaxed. The system wasn't built to be a smuggling route. It just happened to be the easiest one available because almost nothing got checked. Counterfeit goods moved through that same door. Unsafe products that would never pass a real inspection moved through it too. Not because customs officers didn't care about any of this. Because the sheer volume made real inspection almost mathematically impossible. You cannot manually check 4 million packages a day. Nobody can. So when you click buy on that $3 item, you weren't just getting a good deal. You were one transaction inside a pipeline that had grown far too large, far too fast, for anyone to actually watch what was moving through it. That's what makes this different from a normal discount. A normal discount is a company eating a cost somewhere to win your business. This was the government quietly eating the cost of not checking. And eventually, somebody in Washington did the math on exactly how expensive that decision had become. That's the part they're going to walk back next. Not with a warning letter. With an executive order. February 2025. Trump moves fast and ends the exemption almost overnight. It breaks immediately. Customs gets buried under a backlog within days. The U.S. Postal Service straight up stops accepting packages from China and Hong Kong. Nobody prepared for it, least of all the government that just pulled the plug. Within a week, the whole thing gets reversed. Round 2 is different. April 2nd, an executive order goes out. This time there's a runway. Effective May 2nd, packages from China and Hong Kong specifically get hit with a real number attached. 30% of the item's value, or $25 a package, whichever customs decides to apply. 1 month later, that $25 climbs to $50 a package. You can watch the effect hit shelves in real time. One tracked item, a bikini that used to run about $10, jumps to $22 once the new duty kicks in. More than double. Same product, same factory, same stitching. The only thing that changed is the number stapled to it at the border. Then the real deadline lands. August 29th, 2025. Not just China anymore. Every country. No rerouting through a different factory to dodge it. No relabeling a product and calling it something else. The exemption that opened in 1938 shuts, everywhere, all at once, 87 years later. The apps feel it instantly. Temu's daily users in the US drop 52% in May compared to March. Shine drops 25% in that same stretch. That's not a slow bleed. That's millions of people opening an app in the same month, seeing a price that no longer makes sense, and just leaving. And this isn't a policy that flips back next election. A full repeal of the entire rule is already locked into law, set to take permanent effect in 2027. Not paused. Not under review. Done. 87 years to build the door. About 6 months to shut it. A rule meant to save one customs officer 10 minutes on a snow globe in 1938 ended up funding 2 of the biggest shopping apps in the country. Nobody planned that. Nobody in that room even had a word for what an online marketplace was. The rule just sat there for the better part of a century, forgotten, doing exactly what it was written to do, until somebody figured out exactly how far it could stretch. That's the actual story here. Not tariffs. Not politics. A gap that existed quietly for decades, doing nothing, until the right person looked at it and saw a business model instead of a footnote. And here's the part that should sit with you longer than the numbers did. This was never hidden. Section 321 was public law the entire time. Anyone could read it. The $800 threshold wasn't buried in a filing cabinet somewhere, waiting to be discovered. It sat in plain sight for close to a decade before anyone weaponized it at scale. The people who built Temu and shine around it didn't crack a secret code. They just read something everyone else had skimmed past for years. That's usually how this works. Gaps like this don't stay empty forever. Somebody always finds them before the people who wrote the rule even notice they exist, and it's rarely because that person is smarter than everyone else. It's because they actually looked twice at something everyone else looked at once. So here's what changes for you, starting now. The next time a price online feels almost impossible, don't ask how it's so cheap. Ask what step got skipped to make it that cheap. Sometimes the honest answer is a genuinely efficient factory. Sometimes, like this one, the answer is a hole in the system that somebody built an entire empire around, quietly, for years, until enough people noticed to close it. The $3 order isn't coming back at $3. That door is shut, and by law, it's staying shut. But knowing why it existed is only half the picture. Closing a gap this size doesn't just end there. It moves money. Somewhere, that money has to land. And where money lands, there's always a winner nobody's putting in a headline. Before this closed, there was a flag factory in Gaffney, South Carolina. 2 of them, actually, both making the blue backgrounds and white stars that go into American flags. On January 31st, 2025, the owner shut one down for good. Sold off the machinery. Laid off workers who'd been there for decades. Not because he ran a bad business. Because Chinese factories were shipping the same flags into the country through this exact loophole. Price so low he couldn't compete with the material costs alone. That's the side of this story that never made it into a headline about cheap phone cases. While you were saving $3 on shipping, factories like his were closing down a few states away, one after another, priced out by goods that skipped the tariffs they had to pay. Now flip it. With the loophole gone, that competitive gap closes too. Domestic manufacturers, the ones still standing, finally compete on even ground. Big retailers are already showing it in their numbers. Old Navy and Nordstrom Rack picked up real consumer spending in the months after the closure. Walmart and Amazon leaned into it too, both pushing harder into fast, US-based fulfillment instead of slow cross-border shipping. Even Temu is adapting, quietly building out domestic warehouses of its own instead of shipping everything piece by piece from overseas. So somebody wins here, but somebody else pays for it, and it's not who you'd expect. Researchers at the National Bureau of Economic Research ran the numbers on what this actually costs American shoppers. Their estimate landed at $10.9 billion a year, spread across the country. Broken down per household, that's roughly $136 a family. And the same research found the pain isn't spread evenly. Low-income and minority households, the ones who relied most heavily on these cheap imports in the first place, absorbed the biggest share of that hit. That's the trade nobody put in a headline. A struggling flag factory in South Carolina gets a fighting chance again. A family stretching a tight grocery budget pays more for the basics they used to get for almost nothing. Both of those are true at the same time, and neither one cancels the other out. There's one more piece still unsettled. A federal court is currently reviewing whether the administration even had the legal authority to close this the way it did, under emergency powers usually reserved for very different situations. That case could take years to resolve, which means, technically, the story you just watched might not be completely finished yet. But here's what doesn't change no matter how that case goes. You now understand something almost nobody scrolling past a $3 listing ever bothers to ask. Why a price exists, who's really paying for the gap underneath it, and who quietly wins once that gap finally closes. That's the difference between spending money and understanding where it actually goes. If this kind of thing is interesting to you, that's basically the whole point of this channel.